The Young and the Restless Spoilers. Victor Newman's descent into obsession and vengeance has reached a fever pitch, and everywhere he looks he sees enemies. Now that Michael Baldwin has walked away, his moral compass shattered by Victor's unrelenting thirst for retribution, Victor stands alone at the summit of his own fury. Convinced that only absolute control can restore the order he believes was ripped from him. His most recent campaign of intimidation against Jack Abbott, Kyle Abbott and Billy Abbott was merely the opening salvo in a wider war he intends to wage, one that will sweep aside anyone who dares question his authority or stand between him and his prize. From the moment he cornered Jack in the boardroom and threatened the very future of Jabot, to the late-night calls he placed to Kyle and Billy, warning them that crossing him would have catastrophic consequences, Victor has proven that he's more dangerous now than at any point in his storied past. His iron grip on Newman Enterprises has only tightened as each blow he lands is met with fear rather than resistance. And yet the very ones he claims to love, his children, his wife, his niece Claire Grace Newman, are beginning to realize that Victor's tactics are no longer those of a protective patriarch but of a man unmoored, consumed by a vendetta that threatens to swallow them all. Back in the cavernous halls of the Newman Ranch, whispers of Victor's excesses echo like muffled thunder. Nikki, always the first to stand by her husband, now surveys the ruin he leaves in his wake with growing alarm. Each time Victor issues an ultimatum to Jack or manipulates the financial levers at Chancellor Winters, Nikki's heart clenches, not only for the innocents caught in the crossfire, but for the man she once loved. She remembers a time when Victor's ambition was tempered by loyalty and family devotion, when he fought for what he believed was right rather than what he wanted most. Now she watches with a sinking dread as his latest scheme, exploiting Audra Charles to drive a wedge between Claire and Kyle, unfolds. Audra, eager for advancement and intoxicated by Victor's favor, has begun planting seeds of doubt in Claire's mind, convincing her that Kyle's affections are fickle and that loyalty to his family will always come before loyalty to her. Claire senses the undercurrent of betrayal but remains blind to Victor's true intentions, to isolate her, to weaken her emotional defenses, and to leverage her vulnerability for his broader strategy. It is this exploitative cruelty that finally jolts Nikki from her loyalty-induced stupor. She understands that Victor is no longer protecting his family, he is using them as pawns in a game he cannot afford to lose. Meanwhile, the Newman siblings, Nick and Victoria, hold conflicting views on how best to respond. Nick, ever the dutiful son, has tried to mediate, to remind Victor of the legacy he stands to destroy. He has pointed out that alienating the Abbotts risks igniting a full-scale corporate war that could decimate both Newman Enterprises and Jabot Cosmetics. But Victor, deafened by rage, has brushed aside Nick's cautions as the ramblings of a spoiled child more invested in press releases and guest appearances than in the very soul of the family empire. Victoria, on the other hand, seethes with a different fury. Her anger at Victor's betrayal of the principles he once championed has morphed into a steely resolve. She refuses to stand idle as he dismantles everything she's worked for. If Victor will not listen to Nick's pleas for reason, perhaps the threat of a united family front will force him to reconsider. Victoria quietly reaches out to Adam, exiled, wounded, but never truly broken, offering him a chance at redemption by standing with her. She also sends discreet messages to Abby, imploring her to use her influence over Hastings to gather intel on Audra's machinations. And it doesn't stop there. She arranges a confidential meeting with Nikki to discuss the possibility of invoking a rarely used clause in Victor's shareholder agreement that could place the company's board temporarily in caretaker hands. For the first time in years, Victoria dares to imagine a future where the Newman name is not synonymous with Victor's unchallenged will, but with a collective strength born of unity and trust. Across town, Claire Grace Newman, caught in the eye of her grandfather's storm, wrestles with her own conscience. Once blissfully optimistic about her relationship with Kyle, she has been blindsided by Audra's insinuations that Kyle's commitment is conditional, that his loyalty to the Abbott legacy trumps any promise he made to her. Haunted by the possibility that she has misjudged him, Claire confronts Kyle in his loft, her voice shaking as she recalls Audra's whispered doubts. Kyle, equally stunned by these allegations, is mortified that Claire might believe such lies. He offers her his grandfather's former wedding band as a token of his devotion, urging her to trust in the history they're building together rather than the gossip swirling around them. But without knowing who is truly pulling the strings, without realizing it is Victor and Audra orchestrating this ruse, Claire hesitates, torn between her own insecurities and the unwavering kindness of the man she loves. When she turns to her mother, Nikki, uncertain whether to believe her heart or the pressure mounting around her, Nikki breaks down and admits that Victor's recent behavior has even shaken her faith in him. That confession jolts Claire. If her beloved grandfather has betrayed her trust, can she dare to build a future under his shadow? Night falls over Genoa City, and the Newmans gather in the dim light of the ranch's drawing room, Nikki clutching Victor's favorite brandy glass, Nick pacing by the window, Victoria perched at the edge of the sofa, Claire seated quietly, and Adam leaning against the mantel, arms crossed. The air is thick with tension, every unspoken resentment and fear hanging between them like storm clouds. Victoria finally speaks. "We can't let him tear us apart," she says, voice steady but fierce. Victor is out of control. He's using Audra to manipulate Claire, he's threatening the Abbotts, and he's lost sight of why we do any of this, to protect our family and our legacy. Nick nods, adding, "He's not listening to reason. If we don't act now, he'll bankrupt us in this vendetta." Nikki, tears glistening in her eyes, chokes out, "I love him, but I can't watch him destroy everything I've fought for by his side." At that moment, Claire stands, courage replacing doubt, and declares, "Then let's show him that this family is more than one man's wrath. Let's remind him who we are together." Even Adam, ever the reluctant ally, steps forward, offering the one thing Victor values most, loyalty, to the family rather than to him alone. Their plan is born from that unity. They will call an emergency board meeting under the guise of restructuring Newman Enterprises for the next fiscal quarter. They will present financial projections showing the catastrophic risk Victor's vendetta poses, complete with the forensic accounting Victoria's team has prepared. They will expose Audra's covert communications with Victor, emails, text logs, meeting receipts, all evidence that she has been an unwilling accomplice in pitting daughter against father, sibling against sibling. And as a final blow, they will invoke that shareholder clause, placing the company into caretaker management until Victor agrees to mediation. It is a bold and perilous gambit. In confronting him directly, they risk igniting the very corporate war they dread. But emboldened by their shared resolve, they know that if they do not act, Victor's unchecked fury will consume not only their business but every last thread of love that binds them. As dawn breaks over Genoa City, Victor arrives at his office to find an unexpected sight. The boardroom doors locked, a single note on the polished mahogany table. In elegant script it reads, "We cannot stand by while you destroy us. Please join us, your family awaits." Beneath the note rests Victor's grandfather's pocket watch, the one he carried to build an empire. His breath catches as he realizes that, for the first time, the people he loves have turned their back on the very man they once believed was invincible. In that moment, Victor must choose: continue down this path of vengeance and risk losing everything he holds dear, or relinquish his iron grip and accept that true power may lie not in domination but in the fragile strength of unity. As the sun's rays filter through the blinds, casting stripes across the note, Victor's hand trembles over the watch. The next move is his, but whatever he decides, the Newman family will never be the same. Victor's fury had become a tempest beyond anything anyone in Genoa City could recall. His wrath no longer simmered beneath a veneer of patriarchal authority. It roared like an uncontainable wildfire, scorching anyone who dared venture too close. In the silent corridors of Newman Enterprises, his footsteps sounded like thunder. each echo reminding the employees that their boss was no longer the measured titan they once revered but a man possessed by the singular desire for vengeance. Day after day, he berated underlings in impromptu boardroom tirades, stormed through executive suites without warning, and issued threats that left even the most seasoned lawyers trembling. Nikki Newman, who had spent decades learning to navigate his mercurial moods, now found herself powerless. Without Michael Baldwin at her side to temper Victor's worst instincts, she watched, heart pounding, as her husband's vendetta grew ever more savage and ever more reckless. Michael had once served as Victor's conscience, the calm in the eye of his storm. Whenever Victor teetered on the brink of ruinous impulse, Michael would step in, voice steady and eyes unwavering, to argue for restraint. He had a talent for reminding Victor of their shared history, of the countless battles they had fought together, not out of spite but to preserve the Newman legacy. Michael's quiet counsel often succeeded in diffusing the tension, buying the company precious time for damage control. But now Michael was gone, lured away by his own moral outrage, unable, perhaps unwilling, to serve as the living anchor for a man spiraling into madness. Nikki realized that, left alone, Victor's rage would continue to burn until it consumed everything in its path, including the people he claimed to protect. Late one evening, after a particularly brutal clash with the Abbott siblings over a failed takeover bid, Victor returned to the ranch with fire in his eyes. Nikki found him in the study, pacing like a caged lion, muttering threats that would make even hardened criminals blanch. She tried to interject gently, reminding him that Claire and Kyle's relationship was not a chess piece for corporate gain but a genuine bond between two young people in love. "Victor," she pleaded, voice trembling, "you're pushing them together just as hard as you're pushing them apart. Please, let them breathe." He turned to her, jaw clenched, nostrils flaring. And she realized with a start that he no longer recognized the woman who had stood by him through decades of triumph and scandal. Without a word, he swept past her, leaving Nikki alone with the echo of his rage and a cold realization that her plea had vanished into a void. The next morning, Nikki marched straight to Victoria's office, determination etched on her face. Victoria looked up from the stack of financial reports she was reviewing, concern flickering in her eyes the moment she saw Nikki's expression. Over the years, Victoria had weathered her father's storms with a mixture of defiance and wounded loyalty, but Nikki's tone told her this was a crisis unlike any before. "He's even worse, Vic," Nikki said, voice tight. "He lashed out at the Abbotts again, threatened to destroy Jabot, and he's focusing all his fury on Claire and Kyle. Audra's been feeding him lies, pushing him to drive a wedge between them. He's out of control, and Michael's not here to calm him down." Victoria's jaw tightened. She closed her laptop, signaling the end of business as usual. By midday, she confronted her father in the opulent but intimidating grandeur of Victor's private office. He barely glanced up as she entered, so accustomed was he to family members seeking his attention for one cause or another. But today, Victoria's presence halted him mid-gesture, the gold pen in his hand momentarily frozen above the leather-bound ledger. "You need to stop," she said, voice calm but firm. "You've crossed every line you ever drew for yourself. You're not protecting anyone, you're punishing the people you claim to love. And now you're poisoning Claire's heart against Kyle. This ends today." Victor's eyes flared with anger. But this time it was directed not at subordinates or rivals but at his own daughter. He opened his mouth to reply, but Victoria held up a hand and, in a gesture rich with symbolic weight, tossed down a single leather glove onto the mahogany desk. It landed with a soft thud, the challenge unmistakable. "This is your last warning," Victoria continued, voice steely. "If you interfere with Claire and Kyle one more time, I will never forgive you. I will not be party to your vendetta. Not now, not ever." Victor stared at the glove as if seeing it for the first time. Memories, long-buried moments of Victoria standing by him, flickered across his mind. The leather lay between them like a gauntlet, a tangible symbol of the ultimatum she had issued. He felt the weight of it, heavier than any corporate threat he had ever wielded. No board resolution, no hostile takeover. No legal injunction had ever struck him so deeply. For years, he had believed that love and fear were interchangeable tools, that loyalty was a currency he could spend at will. But now his own daughter had spent the most precious loyalty of all, her faith in him. Silence stretched between them, taut and fraught. Outside the window, the city thrummed with its usual midday bustle, unaware that within these walls the Newman Empire teetered on the brink. Finally, Victor rose, his silhouette framed by the city skyline. He reached for the glove, but paused, his broad hand hovering above it as though electrified. "You're right," he said at last, voice low and rough with emotion. It was the closest thing to an apology he had ever offered, a concession that spoke volumes about how far he had fallen. "I'll hold back. For Claire's sake." Victoria nodded once, sharply, then turned and left without another word, leaving Victor alone with his thoughts and the leather glove lying like a silent witness. In that moment, he understood that power did not always belong to the man with the loudest roar or the heaviest hand. Sometimes, it lay in the quiet strength of those who refused to be cowed by threats or lies, those who dared to stand up to him out of love, not fear. Back in the drawing room at the ranch, Claire and Kyle sat together on the plush sofa, grappling with the fallout of Victor's manipulations. Claire wore a fragile smile, the weight of her grandfather's betrayal still fresh in her eyes. Kyle reached across, squeezed her hand, and reminded her that no amount of deceit could fracture the bond they had built. They spoke of futures unclouded by Newman machinations, of weddings and children, of homeownership and late-night laughter in a kitchen of their own. It was the simple hope of young love, untainted by boardroom battles and family vendettas. And in their shared vision of tomorrow, they found a sanctuary far more powerful than any ultimatum Victor could issue. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, the Newman family gathered once more, this time in the warmth of the ranch's patio. A place where so many memories had been made. Nicky poured lemonade, Adam leaned in to share a wry remark with Abby, and Victoria slipped Claire an encouraging nod. Even Nick arrived with a wry smile and a fresh proposal to restructure Newman Enterprises in a way that safeguarded the family from one man's wrath. The mood was tentative but hopeful, built on a fragile truce that had been hard-won. Inside his study, Victor sat alone at his desk, the leather glove in one hand and the pocket watch, the symbol of his family's legacy, in the other. He closed his eyes, hearing the laughter drifting from the patio, and felt a stirring he hadn't experienced in weeks, a wish to be worthy again, not as a tyrant, but as a father, a grandfather, a husband. He replaced the glove in its drawer, set the watch back in its velvet box, and took a steadying breath. The path ahead would not be easy, he would have to prove himself, earn back the trust he had squandered. But as the laughter faded into the night, Victor understood that for the first time in a long time, he was no longer alone in his battles. His family stood with him, no longer as subordinates or pawns, but as equals, united by love and forged by adversity. And so, with the night air cool against his skin, Victor Newman picked up his pen, laid out terms for a new beginning, one built on mutual respect rather than fear. The age of unchecked revenge was over. Ahead lay the arduous road to redemption. But in the steady glow of the patio lights, he glimpsed the possibility of a future where the power of forgiveness eclipsed the power of wrath, and where the Newman family might finally find peace together.